since morning. As one word which was a very common resonating word which came from almost all the speakers was simplifying. So I would take up that as the first responsibility in simplifying all the fragmented know-hows that we just collected from each of these three stalwarts, put them together and simplify it for you guys to really understand what are we talking about when we talk about transformational HR. Transformation of a process, I think, is something which is very simple and easy for each one of us to understand or execute, which I believe everybody would agree to that. But when it comes to transformational of mindsets or transforming people, I think that's where the biggest challenge is. Because processes, brand, color, logo, everything can be changed very simply. But I think the complex remains in terms of the mindsets of people, which is tremendously a challenge. To bring one more thing to context here in the transformation, I believe we're talking about transforming HR. And I'll again repeat HR. When I say HR, there is a human element in the resource. And particularly focusing on that human element as a part of human resource, I think that's where comes the challenge. In a lot of cases, we are so process-driven in bringing in the transformation that we tend to ignore or we tend to forget that there is a human element that we are working with, okay, at the end of it. I'm sure sometimes we as HR drive things just because we are told to drive things, okay, ignoring the fact that we too are humans and we too have to deal with humans in going through that transformation process. Okay, now to simplify the overall process that we have been talking about of transformation, I would rather put it into 4 different questions which would define what transformation is all about. And the first thing to start with transformation is why? I mean, that's the first question, why? And when we ask this question as to why do we want to transform, we come back and we look at the business context. Until unless there is a business context, and that's something which Shaleen was rightly trying to put through with how Audi would go about in terms of looking at the business context and bringing in the transformation. So the first question that comes up is the why. The second question that we tend to follow from there is the what. And when I say the what more or less focuses on what's the outcome that we want to derive out of it. I mean, there has to be some kind of an objective which has to be very clear in terms of some measurable quantum which we want to derive. And if in case we probably are not taking a kind of outcome definition, I think it becomes very difficult for us. So I think that's where comes the second context. The third context, which is very important, is the how. How do we go about? And that's where comes the challenge. That's where comes people. That's where comes processes. So, we are dealing with people, we're dealing with processes, we're dealing with culture. Everything put together is the third phase which we're moving on. And I think the most crucial phase, if you would ask me, is probably the how phase that we have. And the last phase is another interesting aspect of who. Who is to take up the role of the transformation, or who is the contributor in the transformation? And I think this is where, again, all of them sounded the same. It's a shared agenda. And it's a shared agenda. That's where we call for collaboration. That's where we call for co-creation, or bringing up the change. Analytics was also brought up by Bala wonderfully, of how he has been using it in the film. And I think analytics is only acting as an enabler. It's just an enabler which is helping us in terms of achieving that goal, the measurement that we had measured in the very beginning, and just telling us whether we are on target and what further future predictions can we take and move ahead with. So that's basically where I thought that it was important that before we started with the moderation and before we bring in the experts to give their opinion, it's important for us to simplify what we actually heard or what the speakers did speak from the morning. Okay, we'll start with the first question. I'd rather have this as an open question for all of you, maybe to take this up. When you talk about HR transformation, what do we focus on? Is HR transformation talking about imbibing best practices from the best of the firms, or does it talk about creating a best fit inside your firm? How do you look at this?
Okay, so thank you. Am I audible? interesting and a very, very critical question to answer. What is it that we're trying to do, and for who are we trying to do? What are we in service of? I think the first and foremost question to answer in our own minds is, you still have your shareholders, you're doing it for the company's bottom line, etc. Those will always remain, whether you're transforming for bottom line, you're adding new products, whatever your kind of transformation you're doing. But at the end of the day, the most important element is your people, your employees, right? And many a times when we as HR start on this journey, we forget our own departments, right? We forget that the first ones to transform is on board in the transformation journey, in the transformation agenda. We need to believe in it. Believe in what the transformation is yielding towards, where it is driving towards. Rest assured, you're not going to take on that journey or make much progress on that journey. One of the things that, this is years back, but I was working with an elderly gentleman, and he said, and he's a hardcore engineer, so again, nothing against any engineers, but very interesting. He said, what's so difficult in transformation? You put the process in place, 6 to 18 months, it's done. And I had a chuckle, because many a times that's the biggest problem. As most technocrats, people look at it as a process, right? When you look at it as a process, yes, the process will be in place in 6 to 18 months. At the most 2 years, you will be done with the process in terms of people understanding the process. But there is a step one in the journey, right? The step one is about people understanding what the process is. But our job is to make the process sustainable, to make it stick, for people to believe in the process and imbibe the process. And in a way, the journey actually starts when people have started understanding the process. So it's a longer
collar, and the moment we say white collar, you know what is happening to you. And that happens in the organization. Yeah. And then there was one initiative that I took in the previous company, that's this, Volkswagen, is to make the blue collar into white collar, which I was very successful. Yeah. But I couldn't really make the change of blue collar mindset to the white collar mindset. I couldn't do that. However, because I couldn't do that, in FED, this is something that I really want to do. The FED values is something that I resonate with. Yeah, and one more thing, last, is awareness. Being more and more aware of my SWOT, and the moment I see my SWOT, I'm able to see other people's SWOT. And that really makes me powerful. And powerful not in the typical worldly sense, but powerful with that inner strength that I can too. Yeah.
To me is the foremost that you need to have through your life.
Yeah. So working with and through others, I think that's one thing which is very important competency, that you work with and through others. That's a competency which I would put forward as one which we should have anytime.
For me, can't I say two? Please.
We'll do a toss.
You can choose. The most important is awareness. And the moment you're aware, there would be acceptance. And that's what he says about connection. That's what it happens. But for me, top is being aware.
Thank you. So learning agility, connecting, and awareness. That's what. Before we go ahead with the audience question, just to sum up, putting in my experiences too over the years, since we've always heard this word, change is the only constant. Well, being a rebel myself, all throughout, I have challenged it. And my lessons are very simple. There are 3 things which I've found remains constant as a skill, which we can still imbibe, and even though whatever things change, you still would be able to cope up. would be interested in knowing them. I call them as the 3 Ps.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Not the Kotler ones. Okay? The first P is what I call as people skills. Very important. And I call this as not the B2C, B2B, but the P2P business. Very important. People to people connect. Today, especially in the pseudo-socializing world, we are actually not realizing that we are losing this connect. So I think that's something which is very, very crucial. First, people skills. Second thing, which I have learned myself, is persuasion skills. Very important. Be it whatever that we have been talking about, and when we use the word persuasion, I think it has to start off with something called as the self-conviction as the very first thing. If I do not have a belief in myself, in whatever change or whatever thing that we have been talking about. So it starts off with the persuasion, and that persuasion is, the conviction is the one which actually has to be transcended down further to the team or to the people. And my third P, since all of us, we are running behind time, prioritization skills is something which is absolutely crucial. So to sum it up, change to be well driven, we need to focus on 3 perspectives. We need to focus on people skills, we need to focus on prioritization skills, and we need to focus on persuasion skills to move ahead with. I really